What we're going to look at today is how to factor by grouping. So grouping is just another method of using the greatest common factor. So what we want to do is we want to factor out common factor when we have more than two items like we had in the previous lesson. So if I want to factor by grouping, we're going to do pretty much what we just did in the previous part of the lesson. We have to pull off a common factor, but the problem is we have multiple items like 4r cubed plus 24r plus r squared plus 6. Now, if I take a look at this, there's no common factor that I can pull off from all four of them. I got r's and 4 and 24. They have a common factor, but there's no 4 on the r squared. I can't pull a 4 off of the 6. So there's no common factor that I can get off of all four. However, we can use the grouping method here. And when I use the grouping method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put two items together in a set of parentheses. So I'm first going to group the first two, and I am going to group the second two. So 4r cubed plus 24r, we have a common factor of 4, because I can divide off a 4 from both of them. And r cubed and r, we can pull off one r. So we're going to divide by an r. So we end up with a 4r times what we have left is r squared. And then 24 divided by 4 is a positive 6. And then r divided by r is just 1. Now, if I take a look at the second grouping, r squared and 6, it does not appear to have any common factor. So anytime it does not appear, remember in front of any variable, we can put a number 1. So we actually have 1r squared plus 6. Now the common factor in here is going to be that number 1. Both are divisible by 1. So I can divide by a positive 1. And when I divide by that positive 1, 1 divided by 1 is 1, so we have r squared, and then 6 divided by 1 gives me 6. Notice now that we have the same thing in parentheses on both sides of that plus sign, which means this r squared plus 6 is actually a common factor between these two numbers. So, just like before, whatever we divide off goes in a set of parentheses off to the side, so r squared plus 6. And what is left will go in another set of parentheses. So after I divide off the 4r plus 6, or the r squared plus 6, those will cancel out, and I have a 4r. And we have r squared plus 6 canceling out there, and all we are left with is plus 1. So there's our answer, r squared plus 6 times 4r plus 1. If I look at number 2, we have 2x squared minus 5x plus 10x minus 25. Ordinarily, it looks like we could combine like terms. We do have the x's here in the middle, but my issue is I have a 2 out front. So in this case, it's probably easier just to use the grouping method and pulling off common factors that way. So again, grouping, we will put the first two guys in parentheses and then the second two in a set of parentheses. And what we want to do is we want to pull off the common factor of the items that we just grouped. So I'm going to focus on this first group here, 2x squared minus 5x. If I try to find the common factor between 2 and 5, again, we can always use the calculator if we need to. So math to number and GCD. And we're going to put in 2 comma 5. And we just get a 1. So there is no number that I can divide off of 2 and 5 to make them any less. However, both of them have that letter x. So x squared and x, again, when I pull off a common factor, I can only pull off the smaller amount. So x squared versus x, I can only pull off an x. Once I do that, again, x comes off to the side. Whatever I have left will go in parentheses. So 2x squared divided by 1x. Well, 2 divided by 1 is just 2. X squared divided by x leaves me with x. And then we are subtracting. 5 divided by 1 gives me 5. And then x divided by x will cancel out. And then 10x minus 25. This is what we're going to focus on now. Pull off the common factor between 10 and 25. So again, we can either list off the factors of 10 and 25 and see what's the biggest number they have in common, or we can just go to our GCD in our calculator and put in 10 and 25, which means I can divide off of 5. So both of them are divisible by 5. So I'm dividing off a positive 5. So whatever is left will go in parentheses. 10 divided by 5 will give me 2. X comes along for the ride. And then negative 25 divided by 5. Again, if you're unsure, we can always use the TI-83, which gives us minus 5. Notice now again that we have the same thing in parentheses on both sides of the plus sign. So we can divide that off. So we have 2x minus 5. And whatever is left will go in parentheses. Now notice over in number 1, second parentheses, we had 4r plus 1. We're going to end up with the same thing. Whatever we have on the outside of parentheses here will be what goes inside the parentheses. So here we have x plus 5. So inside we have x plus 5. And that is grouping.